honored to have with
Recording in
us the
progress.
Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, the Honourable Chrystia Freeland, who is in the middle of a cross-country tour to talk about the budget, and she has knocked loose time from her very, very busy schedule out in British Columbia to be able to join us today. Deputy Prime Minister, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and to talk about the federal budget. It's been a busy time for you, and we greatly appreciate your joining us. Canadian businesses have faced an unprecedented 2 years characterized by a multi-wave pandemic, inflation that's reached a 30-year high, supply chain disruptions, extreme weather events, and geopolitical turmoil. Given these conditions, it's never been more important for the federal government to focus on economic growth. While the government and the private sector may disagree on what tools should be used, I think it's important to recognize that you've been clear in public, as well as in the bilateral conversations that you and I have had, about the importance of economic growth. And indeed, you included it even in the budget, in the name of your budget. And we'll have a chance to unpack that over the course of the next few minutes. And I'd like to remind the audience that you can submit your questions. I see that a number of you have already done so via Slido, and we can integrate those questions into the conversation. Deputy Prime Minister, the floor is yours for some opening remarks.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Perrin. Thank you to the whole team at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and thank you above all to your membership. We talk often, and whether you agree or disagree with the budget, maybe that's not even possible. I'm sure no one loves every single thing in the budget, but please know that the things in it that you do love are, I am certain, directly because of the conversations we've been having, the very effective work the Chamber has been doing at letting me and my team know about what your needs are right now. So thanks, first of all, for that collaboration. Ça me fait un tellement grand plaisir d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. J'apprécie énormément la collaboration. J'apprécie énormément les idées. J'apprécie énormément les discussions. I'll just make a few very brief opening remarks because it's more interesting for me to hear your questions. And indeed, if people just have comments, that's interesting for me too. What I want to start by saying is thank you very much. And what I want to thank you for is the incredible resilience and ability to pivot that all of you have shown in these past 2 years of COVID and the COVID recession. And I know you've been effective because I look at Canada's macro numbers every day. And the reality, you know, in the numbers is Canada has posted a remarkable recovery from what was really a devastating recession. You know, so in the depths of the COVID recession, 17% drop in GDP, 3 million Canadians out of work. Today, we have recovered 115% of the lost jobs. Huge. And, you know, by no means something that happened automatically or by itself. In the US, to have one point of comparison, only 93% of the jobs lost to COVID have been recovered. When it comes to GDP, it is now 1.2% higher than it was before COVID hit. I know that we are all pretty tired from COVID, tired from the past 2 years. But I think we should take a moment to really, you know, reflect on the counterfactual, to think about how Canada would have looked had we still been struggling to climb our way out of the COVID recession. The fact that we are already past it is really because of the work of all of you, of the work you've done to keep your businesses afloat, and I'm very grateful. Now onto the budget. I had 2 principal objectives in mind in putting together the budget. The first was fiscal responsibility. And it was very important to me to be clear that we had undertaken some extraordinary spending to get through the COVID recession. Our plan worked, and it was the right thing to do. But it was very important for me to be clear last Thursday that that spending was extraordinary. It was there because of the COVID emergency, and that we're turning a page. Turning a page to an approach which really puts an accent on fiscal responsibility. You see that in the numbers: declining debt to GDP ratio, declining deficits, and outperforming the predictions we made as recently as December in the fall economic update. And, you know, what I would also urge people to do, because I know from previous conversations, this is a group of Canadians who are quite rightly concerned about fiscal responsibility, fiscal prudence. Compare Canada with our peers around the world. And we have the lowest debt to GDP ratio. We have the lowest deficits in the G7. That's important. That's what we need to do to maintain our credit rating. So that was part one. Part two, a very robust growth agenda. And I look forward to talking about that with all of you. But from my perspective, the highlights are: one, investing in people, specifically investing in housing, because I see that as the biggest bottleneck, the biggest constraint on Canada's economic growth. Two, investing in the green transition. This is, of course, the existential challenge we face, but it is also an economic imperative for Canada to be a leader in this shift that the world is taking, that our trading partners are taking. And they're going to demand, if we want to sell stuff to them, it's got to be green. Element number three is a real determination to tackle Canada's lag in productivity. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about that. So I think I'll leave it there, Perrin, and I'm happy to hear your questions.
Great, Minister. Thank you very much for those introductory remarks. Can we start with the topic of inflation? It's timely because of the announcement by the Bank of Canada today. It's now running at a 3-decade high. And today, the Bank of Canada increased its overnight lending rate by 0.5%. That's the largest single increase in almost 22 years. It also revised its inflation projections upwards and now expects it to average almost 6% in the first half of 2022. And it warned that there will likely be a need for further increases throughout the year. In your budget last week, you also spoke about the serious challenges that were posed by inflation, but you also projected a federal deficit of over $50 billion. First of all, are you and the bank on the same page on the question of inflation and the approach to be taken? And what is the government's approach to short-term inflationary pressures?
Sorry, Perrin. I absolutely agree that elevated inflation is one of the main challenges the Canadian economy faces. And this budget was very much built with an awareness of that reality. And that's why this budget really is a budget that takes a fiscally responsible path. And again, I would really urge people out to take a look at the clear downward trajectories of deficits and of debt to GDP ratio, at the fact that we are overperforming where we thought we would be in last year's budget and in the December fall economic statement. And maybe the most important fact, that we are charting a more fiscally responsible course than any other G7 country. That says a lot. And I think Canadians who are concerned about fiscal responsibility should take a lot of comfort from that. I think the other things I would say about elevated inflation are it is important for us to have a clear analysis of Canada's situation and to recognize that inflation is a global phenomenon, and for Canada, really clearly driven by global factors. In the first instance, supply chain challenges. And, if you were to ask me, Perrin, what keeps me up at night, I would say China's zero COVID approach and the very severe lockdowns we're seeing right now would be one of the top things. These inevitably have an impact on supply chains around the world, inevitably drive inflation. We cannot directly affect those. And we're also seeing, when it comes to inflation, a new element hoving into view. And this is Vladimir Putin's illegal, criminal, barbaric invasion of Ukraine. And that is affecting us directly. Every time you, go to fuel up your car or your pickup, every time you go buy groceries, the higher prices you are paying are because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And those higher prices for energy around the world, higher prices for agricultural commodities, again, Canada doesn't have the levers to directly affect those, but they do affect us. And then the final thing I would say about inflation is one thing, when I read, for example, the ratings agencies' reports about Canada, which I do attentively, one of the things that we always score very highly on is the strength of our institutions. And in the world today, where the fundamental institutions of democracy are a little bit shaky in some countries, that is a real national strength. And that very much includes the institutional strength and the track record of the Bank of Canada. So I think that all of us should also take comfort from the institutional strength, the institutional effectiveness of the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada has a clear inflation target that was set again for 5 years by the government at the end of last year. And I think we should all be confident that the Bank of Canada will meet that target.
Thank you very much. Can we talk about growth? I was very pleased that even the title of this year's budget referred to a plan to grow our economy. The Bank of Canada today forecasts that Canada's growth will run at 4.25% this year, which is substantially outstripping global growth, and that's very good news. However, most economists predict that after 2 strong years this year and next, we'll fall back into the 2% growth trap that's been dogging the Canadian economy over the course of decades. In your view, would it be realistic for Canada to set a goal of continued growth of 3% over the next several years, continued growth? And if so, are the measures that you announced in the budget sufficient to get us there?
That is a wonderful question, Perrin. And, I believe in under-promising and over-delivering. So I am not going to predict any specific growth numbers, particularly given the environment of really considerable global macroeconomic uncertainty in which we are living today. What I will do, though, is endorse, energetically embrace the direction that you have outlined. I absolutely agree. I think that we as a country need to grow, and we need to own the podium of growth. We need to be ambitious about it. We need to actually really reflect with optimism on all the strengths we bring to economic growth in the world today. A growing population at a time when all of the world's industrialized economies are constrained by labor shortages. Abundant natural resources in exactly the areas that the world economy needs right now, particularly as we face questions about a resource dependency on China or even more so on Russia. I spoke a minute ago about shortage of agricultural commodities. Well, that's another Canadian strength. And education. You know, when you talk about innovation, productivity, yes, we have challenges. We do have challenges when it comes to commercializing our ideas. We have challenges when it comes to all businesses across the country just getting that little bit better. But we also have a tremendous resource, and that is the best educated people in the OECD, a tremendous capacity at the highest level of research in our universities. So I embrace the growth challenge. I really hope that all members of the chamber do too. And let's work hard together to sort of shift the gear on growth for Canada.
Great, thank you. Just before we go, we're getting a number of questions come in from the audience. Just before we go to those, one final question I wanted to put to you is, first of all, let me express thanks for the support the government provided for small businesses to help them survive the pandemic. And you were instrumental in doing that. You and I talked about the subject several times over the last 2 years. I've been truly impressed with the concern that you've shown and with your responsiveness. But even though we're experiencing a strong rebound from the pandemic slowdown, small businesses, as you well know, continue to face the strain of the debt accumulated since the start of the pandemic. And many groups, including the Chamber, have urged the extension of repayment terms for government loans that were made during the pandemic, as well as forgiveness of the interest portion of those loans. What relief do you believe that the government might consider for small businesses at this point?
Okay, so let me start by saying I really just admire so much the way that Canada's small businesses have gotten through the pandemic. It was so hard, so hard. And, you know, maybe in a way it's a little bit like childbirth, where once it's over, you forget how painful it was. But COVID was really, really painful. And among the people for whom it was most painful were people who just knocked themselves out to keep their small business going in an environment of extreme uncertainty, where, you know, we went from locking down to opening up to locking down again. And, you know, one of the things I admired the most, and I saw in so many places across the country, was the extent to which small businesses really, really made it a priority not to fire people, to stay in touch with their workers and to maintain that connection. And that really underscores for me the social value of small businesses. Small businesses are the engine of our economy, but they're also the heart of our communities. So I'm going to start by saying thank you very much. It has been really hard. I am really, really grateful. And, you know, I know sort of living on the edge and kind of thinking, am I going to lose this business that maybe has been in my family for a generation? So hard and heartbreaking and keeps you up at night. In terms of support going forward, we did not announce any additional support in the budget, and that was very intentional. As I said at the beginning, Perrin, and as I think you agree, it was very important to pursue a fiscally responsible path. And that meant shifting gear from COVID supports and saying no to a lot of things. And it was important to be really clear about that and to sort of say that period of emergency COVID spending is over, full stop. Only in that way was it possible to really set Canada on a path of the fiscal responsibility that we need in this high inflation environment. Having said that, it may be worth pointing out to people that some of the programs are still running. We didn't announce new ones, but we have some programs running until May 7th. The support for the hardest hit sectors, for example, is still there until then, in recognition of the fact that, tourism hospitality had, faced particular challenges. We also earlier extended the SEBA repayment deadlines precisely in recognition of those particular challenges that small businesses faced. So there is still some significant support there, I am sorry to the people for whom this is unwelcome to hear. Fiscal responsibility has to mean something. And for me, it means that we need to move past the emergency COVID support period.
Thank you, Minister. Let's go to the questions that the audience is submitting. And just for your information, anyone can submit a question through Slido, and then the audience votes it up as to the ones that are of greatest interest. So I'll take them simply in sequence. First one is, can you comment on a tax review process? Is it something the federal government will consider? And I think where that comes from is that some years ago, the Canadian Chamber passed a resolution at our AGM calling upon the creation of an arm's length Royal Commission to review Canada's tax system. So far, we haven't had much luck persuading the government to do it. But the last time we had a full review like that, none of the party leaders had been born. Is it time for that sort of review now?
That's a really interesting question. And, for people who are tax wonks, I think there is a lot of interest in the current budget. We actually published our special tax measures as a separate little booklet because there is so much that we've done in this budget. Our focus in this budget was to take a look at the loopholes that allow totally legally tax avoidance by really sophisticated big companies. And from my perspective, that's the first review that has been necessary. I think all Canadians understand we need a solid tax base to deliver the social services that we all need and rely on. But I think we all also believe everyone needs to pay their fair share. And the reality is, in the highly complicated, highly globalized economy, where many very, very smart accountants exist and can be hired, what we found when we did our own inside the Department of Finance review of the tax system was there were just too many ways that you could take advantage of unintentional loopholes in the tax system to avoid paying significant levels of tax that it was never, the spirit of the system was never to permit this. So I am in favor of that, and I can prove it by asking you to look at some of the, very sophisticated approaches which are being used, which we are closing down, and that is going to raise billions of dollars for Canada. The other thing that I will say on tax that was important for us to do is to remove the disincentive to small businesses to get bigger. You will all be familiar with the tax support we have for small businesses. Again, a recognition of their very important role they play in Canada, in the economy and society. But you're also aware that we have this kind of perverse tax cliff where we kind of discourage small businesses from getting bigger. And we have smoothed that out. That is a measure which costs me money. It doesn't raise revenue. But I think it's the right thing to do and will really support an objective that I think we all share, which is for our small businesses to get bigger.
Thank you. Next question is about regulatory modernization. Regulatory modernization has been identified in past budgets and in the Barton report as being key to economic growth and improved productivity. Where is the government with its regulatory modernization agenda?
that is another really important question. And I'm going to point to specific areas in the budget where we have committed to getting to work. Actually, three. The first is qualifications. Right now, there are two ways when it comes to qualifications that we tie our own hands behind our backs as a country. We make it way too hard for new Canadians to use the skills and the degrees they have when they come here. And we commit in the budget to making that process of getting your international qualification recognized in Canada much easier. At a time when we are facing labor shortages, that is essential to do. The second thing that we're committed to doing on the qualification front is making it easier for qualifications to be recognized across the country, particularly in the skilled trades and in healthcare. And again, there are many things we need to do to grow the Canadian economy that are really hard and cost money. But there are a lot of things that are easy and free. And making it easier for someone who is a skilled tradesperson or a medical professional to work anywhere in the country surely qualifies as the easiest, most valuable thing that we can do. So that's one sort of thing that I'm very committed to in that regulatory space. The second thing that I would draw your attention to is our critical minerals and metals strategy. This is an investment of nearly $4 billion in really stepping up Canada's ability to mine, process, and use in manufacturing critical minerals and metals. More important now than ever, at a time when Russia has become an economic pariah, our democratic allies need the things that we have in such natural abundance, and there's an economic opportunity there for us. We know, though, that to really execute on this critical minerals and metals strategy, we are going to need to find ways to get these projects done much more quickly. And that is something that we commit to doing in the critical minerals and metals approach. And then the final area where I think that is very much in the regulatory space where I think we have to get better is IP. This is something that people have pointed to for a long time as one of the reasons that Canada has this productivity gap. And again, in the budget, we have a number of measures that are designed to make it easier for Canadian companies to develop IP here and to capitalize on it.
Thank you. The next question brings us back to taxes again. Canada is one of the most notoriously difficult to navigate tax systems, and small businesses across Canada struggle to avoid audits because many can't afford tax consultants. What is being done to simplify Canadian business taxes?
Well, let me say two things. One, I've already mentioned what we are doing for small businesses, smoothing out that cliff from the small business tax rate. I think if you are a small business, that is a very powerful measure, the single most important thing in the budget, and it will remove something that has been there up until now, discouraging you from growing. The other thing I would say, if you're a small business, that you should be glad to see when it comes to taxes in the budget is closing the loopholes that people who can afford those really expensive tax consultants are able to take advantage of. And making the system fairer in that way is better for all of us.
Thank you. Kim C. asks, I believe that we need to reduce our dependence on China as a trade partner. I think countries such as China and Russia are strengthened by trading with countries like Canada. Can the government work with our allies to shift to other trade alliances?
that is a great question. And from my perspective, the just horrific criminal Russian invasion of Ukraine has underscored the economic value of building our economy on strong trading relationships between the world's democracies. That is a really firm foundation. And, look at some of our allies in Europe who built economies dependent on Russian energy and are now finding themselves in very, very difficult positions. So I think that is a smart, far-sighted question. And in fact, our critical minerals and metals strategy is really very much about that. We started developing it before the Russian invasion of Ukraine at a time when COVID and the supply chain challenges COVID created caused us, together with our allies, to really be aware of the vulnerabilities that our supply chain dependency on China created. And those are economic vulnerabilities, but they're political vulnerabilities as well. And so with the United States, with the EU, we began some discussions about how we could support each other. Sometimes this is called friendshoring. So it's not offshoring, it's not onshoring, it's friendshoring. And Canada can be such an important part of that process, including when it comes to the transition to electric vehicles. We have so many of the things that the world needs. Our allies are counting on us. It's an economic opportunity as well. But it is going to require a new national approach to getting things done in the natural resources sector. And a willingness, while of course sticking with our high environmental standards, sticking with a high level of requirement for Indigenous consultation, but also a kind of shared national determination to get things done, to get things built, an acknowledgement that we really have to do that.
Minister, perhaps can I piggyback a question myself on to that last one? What role do you see for—
You're in charge, Perrin, so.
Thank you. What role do you see for Canadian oil and gas in terms of helping to lessen the reliance of democracies on feeding the Putin machinery?
Well, when I tabled the budget last Thursday, I spoke about how building security for the world's democracies absolutely must include energy security for ourselves and our allies. And Jonathan Wilkinson, our Minister of Natural Resources, has recently been talking about how Canada, to support in particular our European partners, will be working to increase the amount of energy that we're able to produce, because they need it. I also think that it's really important for us, and here I'm going to borrow, it's not a new phrase, but borrow a phrase that Jonathan used in a recent speech he gave on this issue, which I think, where I think he put it very well. And when it comes to oil and gas, we need to be confident that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Yes, I am very conscious. I think a lot of Canadians are conscious about the dangers in the world today, about how Russian oil and gas are at the center of those threats. And Canada has a role to play in rising to that, real moral challenge. And our oil and gas sector has a role to play. At the same time, we all know that climate change is an existential challenge, and we need to continue reducing our emissions. And I really believe we can walk and chew gum We need to be working very, very hard on both at the same time. That is one of the reasons that a very important element in the budget that we tabled last week is CCUS. We really believe that the oil and gas sector has a central role to play in reducing emissions. That is what the industry is telling us. And our new CCUS incentives should really help them to move aggressively in that direction.
You just set up the next question. It is from John, who says, as an Albertan, thank you for the important support you've been signaling for CCUS. Can you comment further on CCUS, and can you provide comment on your focus for hydrogen and CCUS and nuclear's place in Canada's future energy mix?
Okay, lots of questions there. And that's a great question for me, John, because I'm in Surrey right now, but I'm flying to Calgary tonight, and I'm spending the day there tomorrow before spending the Easter weekend with my dad at home in Alberta. So yeah, the CCUS credit is a very important part of this budget. We promised we would do it last year, and this year we have laid out the details. I'm going to be talking about it in Calgary tomorrow. I think this is very exciting for Canada. I think this is going to be a really, really big driver of emissions reduction by the oil and gas sector, but not only the oil and gas sector. This is about cement. This is about steel. This is about aluminum. This is about Canada really taking a leadership role in this important new area. And we have the geological formations that really give us the capacity to have a head start. And John is 100% right that hydrogen is a really important and exciting new space that Canada needs to continue to develop. And a lot of the work that we are doing now to reduce emissions can also help build a bridge to a hydrogen economy. And we're seeing a lot of that happen in Alberta right now. And the federal government is very keen to contribute to that. And then finally, I think there was a question about nuclear in there. And I definitely see nuclear power as an important part of our green transition. Canada is good at nuclear, and we need to continue developing it, including SMRs, small modular reactors.
Great. Thank you. Avery Campbell of the Association of Canadian Travel Agencies. COVID-19 financial supports have been the single largest government expense program since World War II. Many of these programs were established quickly as necessitated. What lessons have you and the government learned from this?
Oh, that is a great question. And I actually think economic historians are going to, yes. Okay, sorry, Perrin, I'm being told we need to start wrapping up. So let me answer this question, go back to you. I think, at the 30,000 foot level, at the level from which, a future economic historian will look back on this pandemic, I think what economic historians are going to say is the industrialized economies this time actually learned the lesson of the past. They understood that if you have the resources to prevent deep economic scarring, if you have the resources to prevent your society and your economy from falling apart, from collapsing, from being destroyed, do it. It costs a lot, but it is worth it. And I think that has been Canada's experience. And, I started, Perrin, talking about the very, very strong Canadian economic performance today. 115% of jobs recovered, economy bigger than it was before COVID hit, and very, very strong economic growth in the fourth quarter of last year. Very strong growth in the first quarter of this year. You cited the very strong growth predictions for this year overall. That, I'm not going to claim, I'm not going to say the government did that. It's actually everybody on this call who did that. It was your hard work. It was your resilience. But we gave you the resources to get through it with our emergency COVID measures. That it was a risky decision, a difficult decision to do that. But I feel very, very confident it was the right decision.
Good. Thank you. Minister, we promised you that before halfway through the hour, we would have you on to your next meeting. But I want to give you just a minute or so if there are any concluding comments you wanted to make about the budget or about what you see as next steps.
Yeah, I'll just say, so I'll say three things. First of all, thank you everyone for your time. I know that everyone is really, really busy, and to everyone who asked questions and participated, I am really, really grateful. Second of all, let's work together. I think at the end of the day, what is going to determine which countries, which economies, which societies are successful in the coming decades and which are not is going to be where is their social cohesion? Where are all elements of the country able to work together? It doesn't mean we have to agree about everything, but are we able, the federal government, the provincial governments, the cities, the public sector, the private sector, the not-for-profits, small businesses, big businesses, workers, employers, are we all able to identify the huge areas where we have a common interest and work together on those? And frankly, trust each other, trust in our goodwill and our shared interests, and work together. And the countries that are able to do that are going to be the successful ones. And looking around the world, I see a lot of countries that are losing the ability to do that. I do not believe Canada is one of those countries, but I think we have to work hard to continue to have the ability to work together and invest in that. And conversations like this one are a part of that, a big part of that. And then my final thing that I'll say in closing, Perrin, is I think it is really worth reflecting on all of the strengths that we as a country bring to the very real and very significant challenges we face in this very challenging world. We have a growing population at a time when we have the strongest growing population in the G7. And we have a growing population at a time when the labor shortages are the biggest constraint in the world's economies. We have a really smart population. We are the best educated people in the G7. We have abundant natural resources at a time when the world is very worried about access to those. We are a huge food producer, again, at a time when the world is worried about access to agricultural commodities. We have a society which, for all of our flaws, really basically works. And I think even as we of course need to focus on what do we need to do better, what do we need to fix. Good teachers also say to their students, think about what you're good at and do that even more. And that's what I would also say to us as a country. Let's remember to think a little bit about what we're good at and keep on doing that too.
Well, Minister, thank you so much for being with us today. And more importantly, thank you so much for the support and the accessibility that you've provided over the course of the last 2 years. It's been an incredibly challenging time. We have big challenges still ahead of us. And you've been keeping up a very hectic schedule. We're very grateful for you for being here today and for the leadership you've been showing. We'll look forward to working with you in the future. And thank you all for joining us today, and a very happy Easter to you, both you, Minister, and all of you online. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Perrin. Thanks, everyone.